Okay. Well, thanks for the introduction. I guess as we go through this, you're going to learn everything there is to know about nurdles. And if you hadn't ever heard of nurdles before, you're going to hear more than you ever wanted to know. But it's going to get you inspired to be able to go out and try to find them and see if you can find them around your area. And you'll hear about the impacts and some of the solutions that we're trying to come up with. So let's just kick right off here. I don't know how familiar y'all are with plastics or not, but really you look at macroplastics, which is anything larger than 5 millimeters. And then anything smaller than that, 5 millimeters, that's pretty small. Anything smaller than that is considered microplastic. And then within that microplastic, you really have two primary types. You have your primary, you have your secondary. And your secondary are plastics that have broken down. They used to be products. The sun got to them, wave action, river currents, run over, whatever. They just broke up into smaller and smaller pieces, and you find those. But within that, you'll also find these primary. And primary are plastics that have not been made into anything yet. And so one of the ones we're going to be talking about is the plastic pellets, which they're also called nurdles. And the term nurdle came up in the early 90s, somewhere in Europe. That's from Wikipedia, so I didn't come up with the name. But if you look at this image here in the middle, you see a lot of the secondary plastics. So they're irregular shaped, flat. They just look like products, pieces of products that are broken up over time. But there are some very small pieces in there that are round, maybe even flat, but they have an actual oval shape to them. And those are nurdles. And so I'm going to show you a number of different pictures as we go through this that kind of get your eye trained to it. Starting with this one here. So these nurdles are the raw material to everything plastic. And so you think about the computers you're looking at now. Maybe you're wearing glasses, your dashboards in your car. Anything that's plastic was first a nurdle. And so nurdles come in all shapes and sizes, although very small. You can see down here at the very bottom, they're different colors. Some are flat, some are oblong, some are square. But these are all the raw material to the products that you use. Okay, so how do they get out into the environment? Well, if it was easy and saying, oh, it's just the manufacturers that make plastic that are releasing these. Well, they do. These things are hard to contain, and wind and water and everything else can get to them. But it's not just at the manufacturing site. It can happen even through all the transportation. And then actually when they get to where they make it to the factory where they're going to be melted down, added color to it, made into an actual product, they can get out into the environment there too. So it's a supply chain issue from when it's made to how it's transported to its final destination of being made into a product. And so this kind of shows you, generally, this doesn't show rail cars, but I'll show you some images on that. But this shows like trucks and then shipping. So, when you look at how there's kind of two different types of ways these get out. One is this chronic, everyday problem when they're trying to offload these nurdles from a silo that they store them in at the manufacturing site onto what they're going to transport them in. And that can be a rail car, it can be a truck, it can be bagging them up to, put them on pallets and put them on ships. So that a little bit, every time they hook up this blue hose that you see here in the middle, little corrugated hose that they pneumatically blow these pellets into rail cars with, every time they hook that up, take it off, a little bit of pellets can fall on the ground. What happens when anything's on the ground? Well, it gets into the nearest waterway when it rains. Then, eventually makes it out to a bay or the ocean. And then it washes back up on the beaches. So that's how they kind of get the chronic everyday problem. Now, there are things that happen about once a year around the world. Somewhere there will be a big spill. The last one that happened a few months ago was in Sri Lanka. They had containers, it was like 250 containers on a ship that sunk right off of Sri Lanka. And well, actually, there was over 1,000 containers, but there was 250 of these containers that were full of nurdles. And the amount of nurdles on the beaches, I don't know if y'all saw any of the pictures from that, but it was like waist deep of nurdles on the beach. And so they have a huge problem over there right now, even still trying to clean it up. And actually, I talked to a group last week that is sending us nurdles to the university here so that we can be able to try to see what type of chemicals have been absorbed into them, see what kind of harmful things are attached to it. But when you hear about something like that, it's in the news, it makes media. There's other groups that are involved in cleanup and maybe even people trying to model where it's going. That's less likely things that happen. That happens about once a year, something big happens. So last one in the US that was big like that was in New Orleans last summer. So August of 2020, there was a container ship or a container that fell off of a barge that opened up, and nurdles just fell out all over the place, including bags. And so you look in the bottom right-hand corner, this was from several years ago off the coast of Africa. Those are all bags that you see floating out there. And that white stuff you see in the water, that's all billions of nurdles coming out. And so about once a year, something like that happens. This has been known about for decades. Back in 1992, the Environmental Protection Agency came out with a report that talked about, in this report, they had 80 species of birds that they knew about at the time that were eating these pellets. Sea turtle, there was 4 species of sea turtles. There was fish. And so this was, 30 years ago. Now we know there's actually hundreds and hundreds of species. And so what you see here in the middle is an image of what page 30 and 31 of this plastic pellets in the aquatic environment, sources and recommendations. That is an intestinal tract of a seabird. And there's probably 10 or so nurdles in there. And so that's really the biggest impact that you see from these nurdles being out in the environment is they look like seeds, they look like eggs, they look like a food source that an animal would eat. So they eat it. There's no nutritional value. Then it can get in their intestines. It can twist their intestines around to where even if they do eat good food that's natural, it wouldn't be able to pass through their system. And then they can also starve to death. So that's the big issue. The other issue is that these pellets absorb harmful chemicals whenever they're in the water, so they can act like sponges. And so we've done quite a bit of research. There's some other groups in Japan that have the Plastic Pellet Watch is what they're called. You can send them nurdles and they'll tell you what type of chemicals are absorbed into their pellets. And we do quite a bit of that here at the university where we're finding, you've heard of PCBs in light fixtures, that's out in the water, unfortunately. PAHs that come out of your cars and on the roadways, those are absorbed into those. DDT, which is banned in the US, but they still have it like in Mexico, stuff like that. So it's in our waterways. These plastic pellets absorb that. Oh, okay. One last thing, the human health issue. So, is there an impact to human health? Well, think about fish that are eating these pellets and then say we're eating the fish, like a commercial fish. Do those chemicals come off of the plastic pellet, go through the stomach lining and into the muscle tissue that then we're eating? We don't have that answer yet. There is research going on right now looking at that. We now have the tools to look at that type of thing. So that research is going on. And so hopefully within the next 2 to 3 years, we would have that answer. We do have, so the methodology for going out and collecting samples is really simple. You go out for 10 minutes. If you don't find any plastic pellets, 0. And 0 is data. So, even if you don't find anything, that tells us something. It tells us, well, maybe this isn't a source, or maybe there's no contamination here. But if you do find one, you start your watch for 10 minutes. You collect for 10 minutes, and then you count up how many nurdles you find after that. And then you go to nurdlepatrol.org, or you can download the app. And then you put in your location that you're at, the date, and then how many you found. And then it shows up on a map. And then you can immediately go to that map, and you can zoom in, you can print it up digitally or hard copy, and you can go to your elected officials, or you can go to your state regulatory agency that monitors, plastic pellets and companies, spills, things like that. Take it to them and say, look, we got a problem. You need to do something about it. And I'll show you some of the solutions that we've come up with and how to go about that. We were also converting a lot of our materials to Spanish. So that's why you see here the informational card is actually in Spanish. So we got right after we had a spill here in Corpus Christi in 2018. Corpus Christi is in Texas, right on the beach. There was a lot of nurdles that had come in. We'd called the Coast Guard, who you're supposed to call when there's a spill. They called the state agency in Texas that's supposed to come out when there's a spill. They took samples and said, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We don't know who spilled it. We don't know how to clean up all these pellets, so we're not going to do anything. And then, so, automatically we're like, well, we got to monitor it. We're researchers. We got to see how long this is around and all that. So we started up a Facebook page. And that's how we could communicate of what we're finding where. Well, after about, 2 weeks after starting that page, there were groups in every state in the Gulf of Mexico that wanted to know if they were going to show up on their beaches. They want to know if those pellets were coming their way, even down in Mexico. So within a couple of weeks, we had, 300 volunteers that had come on board to say, hey, we want to see. So we were like, well, we need to come up with a methodology that everyone's doing the same thing, not just going out there using tools like nets and all this kind of stuff. So we came up with, you have to use your hand, and you go and we standardize all the data for 10 minutes for one person. Now you can go out in a group of people and collect, there could be 20 people, and you just, put in how many nurdles you found within that, you could go for 30 minutes, but the database automatically standardize all the data so that when you go to that Nurdle Patrol map, you can see the colored dots. They represent 10 minutes for one person. And that's real important when you want to start comparing. And that's why we came up with this methodology paper. It was published in Marine Pollution Bulletin. And this for two reasons. One is researchers want to know if they're going to use the Nurdle Patrol data, they want to know that the data was collected accurately. And so we got a couple of ways to make sure people are collecting it, like they're not picking up seeds or fish eggs or something like that. You're supposed to take pictures of your nurdles and then post those with your form, with your date and location and how many nurdles you found. And then that's one way we can tell. The other way that people use this publication is for litigation. So there's a number of groups around the country that have sued not just manufacturers, but distributors of nurdle manufacturers and distributors with the Nurdle Patrol data. And, having this published is key for using this for litigation. So that's the reason we had that in a scientific journal. Okay, so say you go out and you do a survey and you put your data into nurdlepatrol.org. This is the map it shows up on. And so these colored dots that you see are all surveys that have been done, and they represent the concentration for one person for 10 minutes. And so you can look, what's interesting here in Florida, look on the west coast of Florida. You see all those greens? Remember how I was saying zeros are important? Well, it just so happens when you look at manufacturing sites in Florida, there are very few until you get up to Pensacola, which is around the panhandle of Florida. And so the further west you go, the warmer the colors get, which actually mean a higher concentration of plastic pellets were found in a 10-minute period. Well, if you look at the locations of where manufacturing sites are, it follows that as well. So once you get to Houston and you start seeing over 1,000 nurdles being collected in 10 minutes, that's where the highest concentration of plastic manufacturing sites are in the country. And so the data is able to show that, and that's important when you're trying to explain this to politicians or the state agency that's supposed to be regulating these companies and saying, look, we need to do a better job. We need to come up with new policies to prevent these pellets from getting out into the environment. And so let's zoom in here. So this mapping system is like Google Earth. So you can zoom in or you can zoom out. You could zoom into your house if you wanted to and see if you had nurdles there. But what's interesting about this, I'm just going to do Texas here real quick, and notice, so a lot of this is along the beach, but if you go inland, there's along the bay, they're along river shorelines, they're along railroads. So there's been over 100 surveys done along railroads. Almost every single site on a railroad has nurdles on it, which is what, remember I told you that it's a whole supply chain. So it has to do with transportation as well. Railroads is a key way that they distribute these nurdles across the country. And so we find a lot of those inland. The highest concentrations we have found in the country so far have been up in the Galveston Bay, which is in Texas, which is the bay that's right next to Houston, Texas, which is there's something like 55 plastic manufacturing sites are just around this bay. And so that's why you find it's not uncommon to find 500 to 600 in a 10-minute period. The highest concentration collected was over 30,000 in 10 minutes. And so that the strand line, you can go and just swipe your hand across it, and you're just picking up 200 to 300 pellets at a time. I mean, it's crazy the number of pellets there. But this information right here has been extremely helpful in working to change policy in Texas, which if we can change it in Texas, we believe we can change it in every state in the US, because the only, I'll get into this about what likely your state has. Now, there was the spill. Remember I told you about the New Orleans spill? Right after the spill, you could go down, I mean, within a day or two after, you go down to some of the riverbanks, and they were collecting 250,000 pellets in 10 minutes. They were scooping them up because it was inches thick. They had 5-gallon buckets, and they were just scooping them up. So if you went down there now, because it's been a little over a year, they've had a couple of hurricanes come through there, a lot of water moving down that river. You can still find a lot of pellets, but it's nowhere near that type of concentration. And why? Well, the river takes it downstream and moves it out into the ocean. And so, the pellets are still around. They don't dissolve. They will not go away in our lifetime. That's for sure. So they're accumulating somewhere. So let's look up near Illinois. And so there are some surveys that have been done. Looks like around St. Louis, there is some down there. But what y'all can do is y'all can go to nurdlepatrol.org, zoom in, and then click on these dots. These dots will tell you, it won't tell you who did the survey because we try to keep that anonymous. But it will tell you everything else. It'll tell you how many pellets they found, what date they found them, any notes that they put in there. So if people sample on a railroad, they'll put railroad in there, things like that. And actually, I believe one of these Illinois sites to the north up there, that one was on a railroad, the one that's kind of inland looking away from the Mississippi River. So we've had over 4,100 volunteers to date that has sent data in to nurdlepatrol.org, over 9,500 surveys. And actually, I just looked today, there's over 9,700 surveys. So we're getting close to that 10,000 mark of surveys done, which the more information you have, the better case you can make that there's a problem, that things need to change. Over 4,000 sites. Most of those are in the US. There are about 14 different countries. Actually, just yesterday, Kenya put a sample. They did a survey and they put data into the database. And then over 135 partner organizations. And so partner organizations are groups that start up their own Nurdle Patrol. And I'll show you some of the kits we send out to help groups it's totally free, but to help groups get started. And then the teacher kits have been real popular. We just started this in February. We've sent out close to 500 teacher kits already, all across the US. And I'll show you a map here in a second of where we sent those. So how do we afford to be able to send out all those kits for free and stuff all over the place? And then, putting up billboards, and we host plastic pollution symposiums and all this stuff. Well, we ended up getting $1 million from a settlement. So there was a lady named Diane Wilson in the San Antonio Bay Estuarine Waterkeepers that sued FORMOSA Plastics for discharging plastic pellets into a bay here in Texas. Well, they were suing for like 160 million. They ended up settling for 50 million, with FORMOSA agreeing to change their permit to say zero plastic pellet loss. And why that's important is because the permits in Texas currently say that companies are allowed a trace amount of suspended solids. So they don't even mention plastic pellets. And California is the only state in the US that mentions plastic pellets in their permit for stormwater and wastewater. So this is where Illinois could make some changes as well if y'all have an issue there. But they agreed to that. And so, and because they agreed to that, if any pellets are found outside their fence line, they have to pay $20,000. And wouldn't you know, since January, they've already had to pay like $300,000. And so that money's going back into research projects, restoration, stuff like that. But Nurdle Patrol got $1 million of that $50 million. We get $200,000 every June for 5 years. And it's for doing a plastic pollution symposium. We created a Nurdle app, which if you're going to start doing surveys, man, that Nurdle Patrol app really saves time. It takes you literally 10 seconds to put a survey in. It's real quick. And then we create a bunch of promotional videos, startup kits that I'm going to show you here in a second, teacher kits, and then billboards. So here's a look at the app. The first time you use it, you have to create a profile. You know, you say where you live, you know, who your name and all that. That's why you only have to put it in one time. And then step two, you go to the map and you put where you're at. You know, just press your finger on the map at where you're at, collecting. You know, if you're on the Mississippi River, put it right on the river bank where you're at, collecting. And then you just put how many nurdles and the date, and boom, you're done. It's quick. Okay, so startup kits. So we've got 100 glass sampling vials. We've got field notebooks, tweezers, those informational cards. We put probably about 20 of those in there. And then we have some fun things like t-shirts and buffs, and it all goes into a nice duffel bag. But one of the most important things is the flash drive. So we give a flash drive that has the logo in there so you can make more swag to give out at like cleanup events and stuff that you have, which y'all are about to have, I know. But then you can also have this presentation that I'm giving here. And so you can put your own logo on it. You know, it doesn't have Mission-Aransas logo on there or the university's logo. You're supposed to make it your own. And this is for groups. It's a real easy commitment. You just have to commit to, if you want one of these for free, you commit to doing one 10-minute survey a month. And then you got to send us your logo because we're going to put it up on our website as a partner. And so it's real easy to get one. And so if y'all are in a different group besides this one, feel free to get a hold of us. But these have been real good for getting folks to start up their own program, or say they're already collecting water quality. They just want to incorporate Nurdle surveys into their existing program. We'll give you a kit. You know, it's that easy. We got a lot of teachers that were like, you know what, we want a Nurdle kit, but we're not going to be taking our students out to do surveys. We just want to teach them about plastics getting into the ocean. So we're like, oh, well, let's make an education kit. So we have these education kits that have 6 vials of Nurdles in them. And then there's a flash drive with the curriculum in there that gets students into groups, talks about how plastics get into the ocean, what some of the impacts are. And then they develop their own solutions for how to prevent that from happening. And so it's a real good interactive teaching tool. And so if you know of any teachers that want it, they go to our website and then they go to the nurdlepatrol.org. They go to news, and there's a news article there called Teacher Kits Hit the Streets. And they click on that, and there's a URL in there where they can just click on there, fill it out, and we check it every week. And so we're sending Yeah, I think like last week we sent about 30 kits out. So we got a lot of them. This is where we've sent all those kits to date, all over the country. And even some, the green and yellow are the startup kits. We've sent some even down into Mexico. And I think the furthest one we sent was over in Europe. We sent one over there. That actually cost a lot of money. Go figure. So what can be done? I mean, it almost seems overwhelming, right? I mean, you look almost anywhere you look, you're going to find hurdles. So, there are some best management practices is what they're called. And so they can be as simple as a tub underneath, the connection point where they're hooking the tube up to pneumatically blow those pellets in. It can be that simple. And then when pellets fall in there, they can recycle. Well, we can't recycle, but they have tools at manufacturing sites to recycle them. Once they come out of that tube and they fall on the ground or in that tub, they're contaminated. So they can't use them after that. So they either got to dispose of them, or if they have a way to recycle them, recycle them. They're too small for us to recycle, unfortunately, individually. So we think that the best way to combat this is through stricter stormwater permits. So closing those loopholes and making sure that the stormwater permits specify 0 plastic pellets can be released. And this helps enforcement. So enforcement goes and they do their inspections and they can say, we found pellets in your stormwater and that's going to end up in our waterways. You're going to get a fine. Plus you have to put best management practices in place. And if you don't put best management practices in place and we come back in a month, the fine is going to be steeper. And so, things like that is what we want to be able to see. And so, but the first step is getting these stormwater permits in a good position to where the regulatory agency can actually do something with them. And so in Texas, we came up with the Texas Nurdle bill that we submitted this last legislative session. And it didn't make it all the way through. And that was because the state agency that would actually be doing a lot of the tasks that we put into this bill, they were already doing so because of the FORMOSA case that happened and because of the Nurdle Patrol data. They already saw that there was an issue. They saw there was a loophole and they wanted to be able to fix that. And so they were already working on it. And so this bill went into an interim study phase to where we're doing some interim studies to fill some gaps of data that we didn't have. And to be able to come back in the next legislative session with a better bill that everyone's happy with. So it's not dead. We're still working on it. And then, so all of that FORMOSA money I told you about, that can only be used for education outreach. But, we're a research institution. We've got a lot of researchers we work with. And so we're looking to do, what hasn't been done that we need to look at now. So we're mapping chemicals that are absorbing into the nurdles. We're also trying to fingerprint the nurdles to determine the number of samples. So say you go out and you're on the Mississippi River and you collect 50 nurdles, which is totally possible. 50 nurdles, how many of those were from one spill? Or were they from 50 different spills? So there's some big regulatory actions here. So, all these manufacturing sites, a lot of it's self-reporting. So if they have a spill of a certain amount, they have to tell the regulatory agency, look, I made one spill. But what if we could go out to the fence line, do a survey, collect 50 nurdles, and say, look, there were 10 spills that created this, but you only have recorded that you had one spill in the last 5 years. Okay, automatically there's something that the regulatory agency can latch on to make changes on site for best management practices and things like that. Because that's the ultimate goal, is to get best management practices in place at these facilities so that you don't get any pellets that are getting into the waterways. And then also, so last week we just got over $400,000 from the NOAA Marine Debris Program for expanding Nurdle Patrol throughout Mexico. So we're working with the University of Veracruz down there, and all this stuff I just told you about, Plastic Pollution Symposium, Nurdle kits, all that stuff. We're doing all that throughout Mexico, creating new partnerships and trying to get more data collected down there, because at the end of the day, we can do everything we want in the US, but then we look down at Mexico and we're like, oh, maybe this stuff's coming from Mexico, right? So we need to be able to have that information. And I think that Mexico would want to have that, because what if they're saying, oh, it's the US that's contaminating our beaches and our rivers? So that's an exciting thing. There's some media that's about to come out about that, hopefully this week or next week. We also do interns. This last week, we had an intern from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She actually was, and that's probably who y'all had talked to initially, to be able to find out about Nurdle Patrol, because she was going to organizations all along the Mississippi River, trying to make partnerships, seeing who wants to get involved, send them a startup kit, and so we do have opportunities like that. So I've had interns from San Francisco. They didn't live in an area where they could go out. They were high school students, actually, and they didn't have a car. They had a way to go out to do Nurdle surveys, but they wanted to help. So I had them write articles. And so if you go to Nurdle Patrol and look at the news, a lot of interns wrote all those articles. These were things that we wanted the public to know about Nurdle. So they just started writing the articles, and we would fact check them and all that. So a lot of opportunities. And then we've got a couple other exciting things we're doing. One is a 4-part series with that lady, Diane Wilson, that I told you about. She's a 4th-generation shrimper who won the largest clean water settlement act by a single person against a major company. So, she's a shrimper. So there's a huge, great story there. So we're doing a 4-part film series with her. And then the Great River Road, we want to be able to go down the entire Mississippi River, collecting samples where they haven't been collected, and try to do that over a 2-week period, and call it a Nurdle expedition. We did one across the Gulf of Mexico back in 2019, and it's on the homepage of nurdlepatrol.org. So if you have 18 minutes, that's how long it is. It's entertaining and informative, so feel free to go check that out. We do have a Facebook page, so if you're interested in Nurdles, and people are posting on there on a daily basis on what Nurdles they're finding where. If any news comes out about a spill or new research, Nurdle Patrol is the place to be about that. There's about 2,700 folks on there right now, a real friendly group on there. And then, of course, our website. And there's a 4-minute training video of how to do a survey, stuff like that. We also have a YouTube channel, which has a lot of different videos on there. Go on there. There's actually a Nurdle training video that we're going to put on the website. We're having the website revamped right now, but we're going to put it on the homepage. But it's how to sample in a river. And so that's on our Mission-Aransas page on YouTube. There's a playlist called Nurdles. Click on that and you'll find it there. And then this is the documentary I was telling you about, that where we went all around the Gulf of Mexico in a 10-day period, sampling at every accessible point, and entertaining and informative. And then one of my last slides is like, okay, why are we doing all this? Well, these are my kids, Jack and Parker, and they ought to be out there cleaning up seashells, picking up seashells, playing in the water, doing things that kids do at the beach, not picking up plastic pellets, right? And so, these plastic pellets likely will not go away in their lifetime. They don't dissolve. They might get a little smaller, but they accumulate over and over again. We know there's a problem. It's documented. So now it's time to make change. And so I'm glad that y'all are going to be a part of that. And so with that, I know y'all have a volunteer weekend coming up, October 8th to 10th, and going out and, collecting Nurdles and submitting it to nurdlepatrol.org is a great way to do that. So I'll leave this up. If y'all have any questions for me, my email is real simple. It's jace@utexas.edu. And so feel free to get a hold of me anytime. And I'll take any questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jace. We're happy that we're trying to spread Nurdle Patrol to Illinois, although it's very slow progress so far. but that's why we have this event coming up, is to try to encourage people to go out for the first time and conduct their own Nurdle surveys. So this can be done anywhere across the state. You don't have to be in the Alton area where NGREC is. So does anybody have any questions for Jace? You can either unmute yourself and ask or put it into the chat box. I'll start it out with a question. Have you noticed any trends since you guys have started the program of either getting better or worse?
Yeah, so I guess we've been doing this about 3 years now, and that's too short of a time to see any differences. But we have had students do research on when would we see them more often. And so it's kind of what you would expect is like after a heavy rain, that's when you see more. Especially if you're along rivers and things like that, you go up to the highest strand line, where the river was, and that's where you'll find them. Here on the beach, whenever the waves are bigger and the water is tides, like a storm surge is up, that's when you'll find them. And so we have tried to isolate, like, when are we finding more nurdles? And so part of the methodology is when you go out, you look at the new strand line or the old strand line. And so that old strand line, these things float. So you're almost always going to find the old strand line. But the new strand line, especially along a river, is going to be pretty much probably right where the water is, unless there was a recent rain, but they'd be right at the couple of inches by the water. So if you don't find them at the water, then go up to the strand line. But that tells us if it's a new event or if it's an old event. And that's real important, because if it's a new event and the concentrations are high enough, then we call the Coast Guard, because that puts it on the official record that, hey, there's a spill here. We need to figure out, how to pick this up. Or especially with the state agency, the state agency, they like to have official records of them going out and looking at the nurdles to see the spill. So it's a way to be able to say, look, there's a high enough concentration here. We need to get the state agency out here to investigate. So.
All right, does anybody else have any questions?
I'm retired from a company that probably put a lot of those out there. I'm retired from Olin Corporation that makes shotgun shells. They get those pellets in by the carload. Then some of those small ones, Palmer has what they call a memory. So once that plastic's melted, if it gets heat again, it'll go back to its original shape.
Wow. Well, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, does not categorize these as hazardous material. So in themselves, they're probably not. It's whenever they get out and they're in large numbers and something eats them or they absorb those chemicals, I think that's when they become harmful. So, nobody's ever tried to say that these things are bad before. Well, I guess, the EPA did back in 1992 when they came out with that report. But really, there's not a big movement to try to stop this from happening, I should say. So a lot of the facilities, especially the older facilities that were made, they weren't made to try to contain these because they weren't considered hazardous material. And the permits didn't require them to keep them on site. And so, that's one of the things that I think we're seeing starting to change now that we see how many of these are out there with the Nurdle Patrol data, is that agencies are like, okay, we need to try to start containing these because they are like plastic. This is like, somebody going out and throwing their cigarette butt on the ground. We don't allow that. There's a fine associated with that to an individual. The companies need to be held accountable in a similar type way because they're discharging plastics. And so the problem is sometimes it'll take millions of dollars of engineering to be able to keep those pellets on site.
Yeah, Olin's on Wood River Creek, and that runs right into the Mississippi. So no doubt some of their noodles end up in the river.
Yeah,
I'll be interested to see what y'all find on October 8th to 10th on y'all's cleanup. That'd be real interesting.
Those surveys in Illinois that are right by St. Louis, those are from NGREC. And so the first day that we went out, we found 15, and then the next month we found 9.
Wow. Great. Well, I mean, I guess it's better than 200, you know?
Yeah.
But you know, as you train your eye, you're gonna see them a lot faster too. And so
Yeah.
your numbers might even go up, you know, I don't know. So hopefully not. Hopefully they go down.
Yeah.
Thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
All right. If there are no more questions, then thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. If you're interested in our future speakers for this speaker series, you can find them on our website, which is ngrec.org/RiverWatch. It's on the events page is where you can find them. Or if you have any questions about the Nurdle Patrol Weekend that we're trying to do, you can email me at hgriffiths@lc.edu. All right, thank you.